Dito sa video na ito, ipapakita natin yung steps ng hypothesis testing para i-compare yung one categorical distribution to another distribution using yung tinatawag nating goodness of fit test. So, ano ba yung goodness of fit test na ito? So, kung maalala nyo, meron tayong Titanic dataset noong first quarter na ginamit natin para sa ating mga examples. At pwede nating i-access ulit yung data na yon using yung JAMOVI by opening it in the data library and searching for Titanic. At mag-appear na to. And if we click it, then maglo-load yung ating data containing the class, variable, sex, variable, age, survived, whether no or yes, at yung frequency ng mga classes na to or categories na to. Maalala natin na if we go to exploration, we can determine yung bilang ng mga nag-survive o yung frequency ng mga sumakay doon sa Titanic based on their economic class. So dito sa frequency, pwede natin ilagay yan sa may variables. Tapos yung class natin, ilagay natin doon sa split by. Doon sa statistics natin, we're not that interested with N. And yung missing natin, mas interesado tayo doon sa sum ng mga frequencies sa bawat category. And it appears here sa ating table where we have 325 na first class passengers, 285 na second class passengers, 706 na third class passengers, and 885 na crew. And ang question is kung equally represented ba yung mga members ng economic classes doon sa Titanic ship. Now, take note na hindi ko sinasabi, hindi ko tinatanong kung yung bang mga numbers na to ay representative of the members of the economic classes in the population. That's not my question. My question is kung equal ba itong mga numbers na to base doon sa economic classes. So, pag sinabi nating equal yung mga numbers na to, then ang ina-expect natin is i-add natin lahat ng mga numbers na yan at i-divide natin sa 4. So, we can do that with Excel. We can add yung 325, 285, 706 at saka 885 at magkakaroon tayo ng sum na 2,201. So, we expect na yung bilang ng mga passengers from the different economic classes should be 550.25 or around 550. However, yung na-observe natin is meron tayong 325 for the first class, 285 for the second class, 706 for the third class, at 885 for the crew. And these numbers seem to be very far from the idealized na or expected value na 550.25. So, ang tanong ngayon is, etong observed value, yung bang difference nila from the expected value is large enough to say that etong mga numbers na to are not actually a good fit dun sa ating idealized na value. That is, hindi talaga equally distributed yung passengers based on economic classes doon sa Titanic dataset. So, going back doon sa steps ng hypothesis testing, pwede muna natin tignan yung hypothesis natin. And yung hypothesis natin states na yung observed value natin is equal to the expected value. That is, yung observed value and expected value are equal. The alternative being that the observed value is not equal to the expected value. That is, the observed value and the expected value are different. And this uses the chi-square statistic, which is yung chi-square, yung summation ng square differences ng observed at saka expected divided by the square of expected. Now, how do we use this information? Well, given ng degrees of freedom, kung babalikan natin yung chi-square distribution. So, depende dun sa degrees of freedom, pwede nating ma-compute yung ating critical value or yung rejection region doon sa chi-square distribution. At pwede nating i-compare doon yung ating chi-square statistic. And if it falls in the rejection region, then we can reject the null hypothesis. So we can set up the test of hypothesis follows. So dito na isulat ko na actually yung HO natin. O equals E. That is the people from different economic classes are equally represented in the Titanic ship. And the expected value here is actually O equals yung na-compute natin kanina, 550.25. So dito sa alternative hypothesis natin, pwede nating isulat na O is not equal to 550.25. In words, we can say that the people from the different economic classes are equally represented in the Titanic ship for the H naught, and the people from the different economic classes are represented differently in the Titanic ship for the alternative hypothesis. The significance level, we can write na yung significance level natin, alpha is equal to 0.05. The decision rule being to reject the null hypothesis if the p-value is less than 0.05. And we can compute for the chi-square statistic and p-value using a statistical software such as JAMOVI. And you can see actually here na na-compute na natin yung chi-square statistic with chi-square statistic of 467.8 at a degrees of freedom of 3. And with this, your p-value is less than 0.0001, which actually is very small. So, paano ba natin gagawin yung chi-square statistic dito sa JAMOVI? Well, now that we have seen yung summary nung or yung descriptives ng ating variable na class, pwede tayong pumunta dun sa frequencies and makikita natin doon sa one sample proportion tests na meron tayong n outcomes na chi-square goodness of fit, which is actually a generalization ng ating binomial test where we only have two outcomes. Yung binomial test na ito, na kung naalala nyo, meron tayong z-test noon. So this time, kapag meron naman tayong n outcomes, meron na tayong chi-square goodness of fit test that is based on the chi-square distribution. So if you click on this one, lalabas itong nandirito sa kaliwa na tinatawag na proportion test of n outcomes, which is another name for the chi-square test for goodness of fit test. Ang gagawin natin ay ilalagay natin yung frequency doon sa counts, which is optional. And but for this particular na data, ito yung kailangan natin. And yung class natin ay ilalagay natin sa variable. At lalabas na yung proportion test with n outcomes dito sa ating table sa kanan. And as you can see, meron tayong first, second, third, at Kruna levels with the following counts: 325, 285, 706, at saka 885, with proportions 0.15, 0.13, 0.32, and 0.4. If we now click the expected outcomes, expected counts na option, you will see yung mga expected counts na na-compute natin kanina na 550.25, which is reported here as 550.3. We can increase the number of decimal places by going to the results and looking at the number format. At the moment, nakalagay dito na ang number format is 4 significant figures. We can increase that to 5 significant figures. And makikita natin that it already reports the whole 550.25. In fact, we can also increase the number of decimal places by just going to decimal places and clicking on any of this. Now that we have that, makikita natin na yung 325 ay pwede na natin compare sa expected output na outcome na 550.25. Yung 285 ay kinocompare din natin sa 550.25 and so on. At lumalabas dito na yung chi-square natin is 467.81 at a DF of 3. The degrees of freedom na 3 ay base doon sa number ng levels minus 1. So in this case, meron tayong 4 minus 1 is equal to 3. Going back to the steps of test of hypothesis, when we are writing the paper, pwede nating isulat itong result na to as follows. Chi-squared of 3 equals 467.8, and this has a p-value of less than 0.001. Therefore, the decision is to reject null hypothesis at the significance level of 0.005. And therefore, we can conclude that there's evidence to show that the people from the different economic classes are represented differently in the Titanic data strip. So, based on chi-square distribution statistic of a chi-squared statistic of 467.8 at 3 degrees of freedom with a p-value of less than 0.001. Now, going back to our JAMOVI, makikita nyo na merong option dito for expected proportions at makikita nyo na yung ratio dito ay 1:1:1:1 lahat. And this is for the null hypothesis that the numbers are equally represented. But of course, you can set yung proportions natin dito to different proportions, especially if you know the economic class distribution during the time of the Titanic. Meaning, dito sa problem na to, ang gusto nating i-test is yung equality ng bilang ng mga economic classes dun sa Titanic ship. And hindi yung equality nung o yung proportion ng nandoon sa Titanic ship base doon sa proportion ng kanilang distribution doon sa population. So we are not talking about representativeness here, we are talking about equality. If you want to see if the economic classes are well represented, then ang gagawin natin is babaguhin lang natin yung mga ratio dito at magbabago na yung ating mga expected counts dito sa ating table. So, with that, magkakaroon na tayo ng panibagong test of hypothesis at hindi na itong test of hypothesis na pinakita natin. So again, nagdidepende ang ating test of hypothesis base doon sa inyong mga assumptions about the data itself. So, that ends our presentation of the goodness of fit test